Alright, first up for materials, I have my trusty pair of Fisker Scissors. Got a nice new pair from the hardware store. We have some Danville 210 flat wax nylon. For the hooks today, we're going to be using Gamakatsu SL12S big games, but you can use any sort of larger gap heavy duty hooks that you prefer. For the adhesives, I have some simple super glue, and I also have E6000. This is what we're going to be using to secure the eyes on the fly. You can always use UV resin if you'd like, or some tie-on eyes. Like I said, the eyes here, I have some simple 3D eyes from the local fly shop, but we also have some tab eyes. If you prefer, you could use that, or some stick-on eyes with some UV resin works as well. For flash, I have some simple flashabou here. Whatever sort of color or flash you prefer, you could use. Doesn't really matter. We have some flash mixed into the Squimpish hair as well. So, speaking of the Squimpish hair, I have some various colors and types of Squimpish hair, some being mixed with flash, like you could see. They have some flash blends, and some of them being the patches of hair. But I just took some random colors that I have that I think would be good for herring, and I pulled those out. And then I also have some white Squimpish hair as well. I have two different types of blended. I think it was the white sparkle. For our hackle, I took out some basic Flatwing hackle, nice thin. You can see I have some different patches here, some various Flatwing saddle patches. You can see here, this is a new one, just some nice thin white hackle. We can tie down in a Flatwing style to get some nice action. And then to go along with the Flatwing hackle, I also have some Ostrich Herl. We're going to be tying this in between some of the ties. If you're feeling adventurous, you can try and soak this, split it from the quill, and then do some palmering as well. And last but not least, just some good old bucktail. We're going to be doing some hollow ties, so we're going to be mixing natural and the synthetic Squimpish hair together. Just some nice soft lawn bucktail that we can use as hollow ties to help blend together with the Squimpish in between the ties. Okay, we've got our hook in the vise here. We'll go ahead and get some of this thread on here, work our way back to around the hook point. Get a nice little base of thread to work with. Nothing too crazy. So now what we'll do is we'll take our bucktail here, and I'm just going to take a nice little pinch off to give us some support for the saddle hackle essentially. Okay, so I'm going to actually taper the hair slightly here. I don't want this fly to be too long, but we're going to use this bucktail here to support this saddle hackle from fouling. Essentially just give us a nice little platform for the hackle. So now what we can do is take some white saddle hackle here, and I usually like to start off a little bit shorter than the longest hackle. And I'm going to be using some yellow and blue as well. So we'll start off with a fairly short one, and these will be tied in flat as opposed to the traditional tying saddle hackle in sideways like with a lefty's deceiver. And I usually like to just strip some of the quill off like that, and then I'll go ahead and lay this flat. And a little trick you can use if you're having issues, you don't want to fight the feather, you want to work with it. So we're actually just going to lightly wrap on it first. And then you can always adjust it if need be. You can pull on it, do whatever you need, and then we can wrap it down tighter in front. And that'll stop the saddle hackle from spinning on us if you're having any issues. Let's take one more white and tie this in. One more white saddle hackle, tie it in a little bit longer. I slowly like to make the length of the hackle a little bit longer as we go. Go ahead and lay this flat. Tie it down. If you need to adjust it, you can. I got that one laying pretty good. I actually went and grabbed another yellow patch because that one was a little beat up. So just find a hackle you like. Try not to go too wide on this. I still want those nice thin hackles. And you can see we're slowly increasing the length of the fly here at the same time. Tied in our yellow hackle, and now I can grab one of these nice blue semi-grizzly pieces, and we'll tie that on top to finish it off. And now we have our nice blue hackle on top as well. We just wrap that forward, and it's time to add some flash. So I'll just grab a couple pieces. This is like a fluorescent yellow or chartreuse flashabou. So I'll just, you can see a little trick is you can cut it at the top and you can just pull out a couple pieces at a time. It's kind of a disaster when it gets out of the bag. So I'm just going to pull off a couple pieces here, fold it in half. And what I like to do is I like to take the flash and pull it at the ends a little bit so it tapers slightly. And then I'm just going to fold it in half, loop it, and tie it right over. Now, we could start building the body of the fly. This would be a good time too if you'd like. You could take a teeny bit of head cement or super glue and just secure the this point of the fly. I'm going to use a little head cement. You could do that throughout points in the fly. Now for the fun part, we're going to be doing some Bucktail Hollow Ties. So shout out as well. Rest in peace to the legend Bob Popovics, who passed away not too long ago. One of the most useful techniques you can learn in modern day saltwater fly tying, in my opinion. So we're going to be doing some hollow ties. We're just going to take some white bucktail, and I'm just going to... Now I have this question a lot. We're just going to take some white bucktail and cut off a section here to tie. I get this asked a lot when it comes to where to select and cut the bucktail off. This bucktail is a good example. It's fairly soft throughout the whole thing. I would say it maybe gets a little stiffer near the top here. So this hair down here in the middle or the sides is kind of perfect for a hollow tie. The other thing is we're going to take the hair here and we're going to pull out all the short hairs because those are going to essentially get in the way when we hollow tie. So we're going to keep this pretty sparse because less material is more sometimes, most of the times. I'm just going to cut that to the length I like. I'm going to move up slightly, and I'm just going to tie some white both on top and bottom. We could certainly add different colors and stuff. A lot of times I like just keeping it simple for the back half of the fly, and mostly going with just some white and then adding color near the front. Because if you handle or look at a lot of bait fish, I've done a lot of commercial bunker fishing, small scale, and then silver side, stuff like that, you notice that a lot of the colors are focused near the top and the back and the sides and stuff, as opposed to the whole body, so especially with something larger like a bunker or herring. So I'm just going to take this and tie this in. And a little friendly reminder, the most important thing about bucktail hollow tying is making sure that your ties are even top and bottom. Because if the thread's leaning more one way like this as you tie, then you're going to have issues when you fold it back. You're going to see there's a distinct difference to where the material is folded backwards, right? So we're actually going to be combining bucktail and squimpish hair in these hollow ties. But for now, we're just going to be using regular bucktail here. Now, of course, you can use your classic little free TD bank pen tool. I have my bobbin a thread. This is what I like to use a lot of times. I'm going to tell you one thing. You certainly don't need to buy anything for this step. Just grab any sort of hollow device you have and that fits over the hook shank and use it. Preferably something not too wide, so you can focus that bucktail. The other thing is we want to make sure we get our thread through there nice and neat, so I try to find an area of where I naturally tie the bucktail collars in, and then I just weave that thread forward and tie in front. Now, the main thing with hollow ties is you don't want to tie on the material itself. We're building a thread dam in front of it, and that will, depending on how much thread we put in front of the bucktail, it'll change the profile of the fly. I'm going to leave this pretty open because you'll see once we run it under some water, it'll kind of drastically change. So you very well could leave it like this. I think I'm going to add a little bit more pressure, but this is a good way to show you that the bucktail's under tension. And the more thread that we add in front of the bucktail, the more this material is going to lie down. So you can adjust the shape and the profile depending on how much material or thread you put in front of this bucktail. And that's pretty good right there, because believe it or not, we kind of want this material to be fairly open. Because what'll happen is we'll run this under some water afterwards and let it dry hanging vertically with the hook eye facing up. And you'll see this will kind of naturally take its shape. You can always just add a little bit more. Now this is an important step I've found when tying hollow flies throughout the years. Adding a little bit of super glue right at the... You don't want this to go on the bucktail, but you want to cover your thread, because, let me just add a little bit more thread here, adjust that. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your thread doesn't slip on you. So just the very tiniest bit of super glue. On that thread, and then what you could do is you can work that around. Making sure not to get it on the bucktail itself. And the whole idea behind that is that this bucktail is under pretty strong tension at times because it naturally wants to open up. So we don't want that thread to slip over time. Maybe catching fish, just fishing it over time, the fly gets beat up, the thread can slip, and then the bucktail will just parachute forward. So now what we can do is we can simply just tie another collar of bucktail here. But while I let this super glue dry real quick, using my fingers to help speed it up, I'm actually going to, so now before we move to the next collar, and that the super glue is just quickly dried, double check, we're going to be using some Ostrich Herl. Now, the idea behind this is that you can, we have some Ostrich Herl here. The idea behind this is, if you're really feeling adventurous, which, by the way, shout out to David Nelson of Squimpish Flies, who showed me this. You soak a Ostrich Herl or Rhea plume in water, and what you do is you're essentially able to, with a razor blade, it's not easy to do. I highly recommend probably checking out some steelhead tires that probably have much more experience with this, but you're actually able to split the membrane that the feathers are attached to off of the quill. So we should maybe do another video explaining on how to do this or experimenting with it. And then what you're able to do is you're actually able to palmer this Ostrich Herl or Rhea hackle, kind of like a dubbing brush, if you will, and then have that hackle kind of spiraling, having that hackle wrap around the hook shank adds a really nice aesthetic to it. What we're going to do is nice and simple. You don't need to have any fancy experience. We're just going to take some Ostrich Herl here and just tie some in on top of this hollow tie here. And this Ostrich Herl is just going to be essentially kind of dancing around on top of this hollow bucktail. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go one at a time, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that the natural curl of the Ostrich Herl is curling in the right direction so that it lays down properly. And I'm going to try and use minimal thread wrapping here so I don't end up building too much thread up, avoiding wrapping too far back so we don't disturb the bucktail as well, our Bucktail Hollow Tie that we worked so hard for. And I'm just going to go around 360 and just add Ostrich Herl, filling in gaps. Depending on how adventurous you're feeling, you can add as much as you like or as little as you like. So let me go ahead and do this now. We have our Ostrich Herl tied in. I'm just going to clean this up now. And you can see we now have a nice ring of Ostrich Herl around our bucktail that it's going to have a lot of action and movement in the water, which is what we're looking for, right? So we're on our last tie here. This is actually where we're going to be combining the Squimpish hair and this yellow bucktail. Now, if I had some more room, I'd probably throw one more collar in here, but to be safe, I don't want to run out of room and end up with a bulky head on this. And again, it's a fairly smaller fly, a 4-rod, so we really don't need that much material on here. We're going to start off with our Squimpish hair, because we are hollow tying this. Whatever we tie on first will be on the outside. So we're going to start off with our darker colors, then our lighter colors. We'll add a little bit of bucktail, maybe some Ostrich Herl in there, and then we'll be good to go. Going to be using some of this kind of gray as the topping, the darker color for this hair. So lengthwise we'll have to figure that out, but let's go ahead and cut some of this off. And if the hair is too long, what you can do, which is nice, is we could take this, fold this in half and cut it so we don't end up with that much waste. And we're just going to figure out the length here. I don't want this dark material to go all the way back. So probably somewhere around here. And again, just a very light amount. I don't like going too heavy with it. So for the top, we're going to start with our darker color. For the bottom, we're just going to add white as usual. And we want to leave ourselves some room here at the front. So a nice little gap here. I want to make sure we have some room at the front for us to fold this material back and build a little thread dam, but not too much. We can always tie forward if we need, so. Now we'll add some white here. Let me break out this white. We have two different kinds here. I think there's a very slight variation, so not too worried about it. So grab some white hair here. We're going to have to do the same where we taper it ourselves because we're going much shorter than the hair. So we take it, fold it, cut it in half, and do that a couple times till I'm happy with the length. You can always pull on the ends like we did with the flashabou to get a more natural taper as well, a more natural appearance. And I'm going to add a little white as I go, as well as some different colors, so I kind of evenly tie the material in as I go. We'll start off with a little bit of white for now. We'll go ahead and move to a darker color. I have some nice purple here that we can use. And again, the same sort of idea. We're just adding some material, tapering it as we go. Adding a little bit more hair if I like a particular color. But again, we're trying to keep it pretty light. We don't want to add too much, right? Sometimes less is more, especially when it comes to tying certain flies. So the length of this, I want it to be just a little bit longer. Something like that. Especially for a smaller, like 4-odd hook as opposed to a 6-odd or 8-odd. You really don't need a lot of material. That's why we're using these hollow ties to build this profile. So now I'm going to take some white here and tie this in. And we're just going to add a little bit more color. And tying all the hair, tying all the Squimpish hair in at the end is actually a pretty nice way of tying these smaller Squimpish hollows. You don't have to do a bunch of ties over and over. You can just do some nice simple bucktail ties with some hackle and then throw on this Squimpish at the end. And just a little bit more white. We can always add a tiny bit of bucktail on the inside collar. Again, I'm trying to be very cautious here, not adding too much material. I will say as we go with these lighter colors, I usually get a little bit longer on the hair. So when we fold it back, again, whatever we tied first will be there first. So I like to have the longer hair on the inside to make a more natural taper. Oh. Exclamation mark, tink. So here I'm just going to add a tiny bit of this nice long yellow, this soft yellow bucktail. I'm just going to add a little bit top and bottom here. So I'll just take a little bit of bucktail, take a little bit of this yellow, put it on top, a tiny bit on the bottom. I'm literally just going to do like 1 or 2 wraps here probably. Okay, now we can go ahead and fold this back. If you wanted to, you could add some Ostrich Herl here at this point, but I'm actually going to just add some to the belly. Just make sure this yellow is kind of evenly spread around. The colors are where we want it. Make sure we weave our thread through our Squimpish hair here. And then just like with a regular hollow tie, we're just going to put our thread right in front of it. I'm just going to give it a nice couple secure wraps first, and then I'll brush it here in a sec with my dog wire brush, which is always a nice fly tying tool to have, FYI. And again, we're going to build our thread dam. It's under some tension. After tying the Squimpish hair in, sometimes it gets a little bunched, especially if you're rough with it like me, so it's nice to brush it out here. Make sure our darker colors are kind of up on top. It's okay if it kind of moves off to the side. Happens a lot of times. Now it's kind of when we can get the material where we want it. You can see it's under a lot more tension than it normally would be because we have that bucktail on the inside of the Squimpish hair. Excuse me. Because what you find with Squimpish hair, it's not as near anywhere stiff as bucktail is. So if I show you here just some natural bucktail, it has much more springiness to it, right? While the Squimpish hair is much subtler and much softer. So having some bucktail on the inside of the Squimpish hair helps a lot in terms of just adding that little bit of tension, which will just add even more motion in the water. So here, what we can do is, and a little trick that, this is something that I've done, it's a tip shown to me by David Nelson in the past. You don't have to do this, but I prefer this way. It's not like a permanent solution, but it does kind of help keep the general overall aesthetic that you're looking for in particular. So what you could do is you could take a tiny bit of super glue, because we want to secure that base anyway, and we can just apply it and have it slightly soak into like the roots of the fly, if you will, of where the Squimpish hair comes back. Just a tiny bit, just to help secure it. This will make it easier for us to tie that ostrich herl in as well. And then secure this down. You can always take your bodkin here, and if you'd like, just slightly, ever so slightly, bring that super glue back to help kind of stiffen up that Squimpish hair right at the base and secure it a little better. Make it a little bit more durable as well. In the past, I've used more and I've kind of molded the shape, because you'll find it actually has a somewhat chemical reaction at times, but I don't want to go too overboard. So now what I'm going to do is just take some white ostrich herl, and I'm actually just going to tie this in at the belly of the fly. Again, using like one wrap at a time or something to not build up too much thread here. If I don't like it and it's not laying naturally, I'll just swap to a different one. And again, I'm keeping these fairly short so they don't foul around the hook. And again, work with the feathers. Don't work against them. Let them lay, they want to lay down, so. Make sure to get some on the sides as well. And again, with the curve facing inwards. Just add one or two more here, and I think we're looking good. Now I'm going to top it off with a little Peacock Herl on top, which is not necessarily something you always do with hollow ties, but sometimes I like doing it, and we're adding some ostrich herl here on the belly, so I figured we might as well get adventurous. We're doing things differently today. We're tying our Squimpish hair mixed with bucktail and all sorts of wacky stuff, so I think that's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is try and neatly trim this. I have a neat little tool that can help me clean out the hook eye with a hot wire in case I have any issues like that. So now we have some nice ostrich herl off the bottom here, and I'd just like to put some Peacock Herl on top. I don't know if I have any, well, it turns out that I can't find any Peacock Herl. I must have used it all up. So we're going to, being that we're tying Squimpish flies, we're going to get extra Squimpish today, and we're going to use some Rhea as an alternative. Very similar Hackle. So I'm just going to cut some of this black Rhea off, and we'll use this as a topping. You can see while this Rhea Hackle is very popular in steelhead flies, how they palmer it. It's got amazing action in the water. Probably wouldn't want a bluefish to take a bite out of this thing. Now, ideally we would tie them in individually. I'm going to try and keep them to where the natural bend of them is pretty similar, so I can just tie it in on top. And I can always tie some more if I want to. If there's any shorter ones, we'll pull those out. Now we can go ahead and secure this. You can see that ostrich and that Rhea on top once we stick this in the water and wet it, you'll see we're going to get a nice result here. Go ahead and whip finish this. We'll go ahead and put some head cement on here, and then we can glue some eyes on. Just kind of coat all the thread here with some head cement, making sure it's nice and durable. Try not to get it on the material. We're going to use some E6000 as well as some 3D eyes here. These aren't my favorite brand, by the way, but usually I like the ones from saltwaterflies.com, but unfortunately I'm out of those. So what we're going to do here is take these 3D eyes. So what I like to do, a little trick, is I take the E6000 or your Loctite Liquid Seal, or I forgot the name of it in particular. There's also some Zap Gap brands, but the E6000 from the hardware store I found works really great. All you do is you're essentially going to take the eye here, and on the back half, picture this is the back side of the eye. We're going to take our E6000 and put a dollop there. Now you have to be very careful. You don't want to put too much because this stuff will squeeze out like crazy. But the idea behind putting some on the back here, in fact, I might actually take a little bit of that off. It's a little too much. I'll just clean the tip of this thing off when I'm done. It's always good to clean this bottle off before you put the cap on. So what we're going to do with this glue now on the back of the eye, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm actually going to take this, and with the glue on the back, I'm going to take it and I'm going to push down and just leave it where it is right there. Now, with the glue on the back of the eye, we're actually able to now push back on the eye, and it's going to spread that glue underneath that 3D eye. But one of the nice things about it is it's not going to squeeze out all over the place, like if we covered the whole backside of the eye with that E6000. So now we'll just go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Now, if it were up to me and I had all the money in the world, which I most certainly do not, I'd be using some jungle cock here, some nice natural eye alternatives to these 3D eyes and stuff. I'm using some 3D eyes here. You can also use tab eyes and stuff like that. You can see here again the amount. Let me see if I can... the amount of glue that's on the back there is not an overwhelming amount. And then we essentially do the same thing where we push the eye down and then push it back and down into the material itself. Try and get that even, like that. By pushing it down and back, we're pushing that glue all the way through, coating the backside of the eye, but also getting it down into the material below. And that's one of the benefits of this E6000. I was turned on to by this sort of glue from saltwaterflies.com, the owner, tying some flies for them. And this sort of adhesive, we were using the Zap-A-Gap version, but I found out the E6000 works really well. This particular adhesive works very well into synthetic materials, so something like an EP fly, for instance, with 3D eyes, or something like the GT slammers we were tying for saltwaterflies.com using the EP dubbing brushes, and then you put the eyes, the 3D eyes, on top of that synthetic material. And with this E6000, it really soaks down in there and then turns it into like a very durable connection, especially if you're going for something like giant trevally. You want to make sure that the eyes don't fall off after casting a couple times or just hooking a couple fish. So you can see out of the water, this Rhea Hackle's sticking up like pretty crazy. And the, the Ostrich Herl as well. But once we stick this in the water, after letting these eyes dry, which you probably want to let them dry for, I'd say, at least a couple hours, if not more. I generally like 24 hours. But what I like to do is after we push these eyes on here, We're going to wait a little bit. This glue naturally expands slightly, so what you need to make sure you do is you push the eyes back down again into their place. Otherwise, they'll be kind of expanded out. But after the eyes glue here, we're going to take this, throw it in a swim tank, and we will see what it looks like.